The scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the underlying smell of desperation that permeated the pack house. Even from the servants' quarters where I'd been relegated, I could feel the collective grief hanging over our community, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The heir was dying, and with him, our future security. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of my small window, watching raindrops race down the pane, mirroring the tears I'd shed since my rejection ceremony 3 months ago. My light blonde hair fell in unwashed waves around my face, a reminder of how little I cared for appearances these days. What was the point? An omega without a mate was barely worth acknowledging in our society. The ceremonial bracelet my grandmother had given me before she died caught the dim light as I twisted it nervously around my wrist. "Remember, Alara," she had whispered as she clasped it around my small wrist when I was just 7 years old. "True healing comes from within." Our bloodline carries this gift, though few remember it anymore. I'd treasured her words without understanding them, just as I'd treasured the silver bracelet with its strange, swirling patterns that sometimes seemed to move when nobody was looking. A commotion outside drew my attention. Another doctor arriving, his sleek black car joining the row of expensive vehicles that had been coming and going for weeks. The Alpha was desperate, summoning healers from packs across the continent, even human specialists who weren't supposed to know about our existence. None had succeeded. The whispers among the house staff painted a grim picture. The heir, Dominic, had been poisoned by a rival pack, and the toxin was unknown to modern medicine. I'd never spoken to Dominic directly. Omegas like me weren't allowed in the inner circles unless claimed by a high-ranking wolf, but I'd seen him from afar, golden-haired like his father, tall and proud as he trained with the pack warriors. Unlike his father, though, there had always been a certain gentleness to his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Now those eyes might close forever. A sharp knock at my door startled me. Before I could respond, Mara, the head housekeeper, burst in, her normally composed face flushed with urgency. "Alara, the Alpha has summoned all pack members with any knowledge of herbal medicine to the Great Hall, even..." She hesitated uncomfortably. "Even the rejected ones." My heart skipped a beat. To be acknowledged, even in such desperate circumstances, sent a flutter of something like hope through my chest. I quickly smoothed my hair and straightened my simple dress. Why would he call for me? "I'm not..." "Don't ask questions," Mara snapped, though her eyes softened slightly. "Just come." "They're trying everything now." As we hurried through the servants' corridors, the bracelet seemed to warm against my skin. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do." The Great Hall had been transformed into a waiting area for the pack. The usual grandeur of carved wooden beams and ancestral portraits now felt oppressive under the weight of collective worry. Alpha Thaddeus stood at the center, his once imposing figure now stooped with exhaustion and fear. His silver-streaked golden hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. Around him clustered the pack council, the elders, and various healers still arguing over treatments. "We've tried everything," a gray-haired doctor was saying, his accent marking him as from the Eastern Territories. "The poison is like nothing I've seen before. It attacks the nervous system, but doesn't respond to any known antidote." "Then try unknown antidotes," the Alpha's roar made everyone flinch. "My son will not die while I stand by helplessly." I shrank back against the wall, trying to make myself invisible as I always did. The room was suffocating with too many bodies, too much anxiety. The bracelet was now almost uncomfortably warm against my wrist. A beta woman I recognized as one of the kitchen staff stepped forward nervously. "My grandmother used to make a tea of willow bark and nightshade that..." "Nightshade?" scoffed one of the doctors. "That's poison itself. In certain combinations, traditional remedies can..." She tried to continue. "We don't need old wives' tales," the doctor interrupted. "We need science." More suggestions came, each dismissed more quickly than the last. The desperation in the room thickened until I could barely breathe, and through it all, my bracelet grew hotter, almost burning now. Something pulled me forward, not physically, but some instinct I couldn't name. Before I realized what I was doing, I had stepped into the center of the circle. A hush fell over the crowd. The Alpha's eyes, so similar to his son's but hardened by years of leadership, fixed on me with confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded, though something in his expression suggested he knew exactly who I was. The Omega his son had refused to even consider as a mate, the one the pack whispered about with pity or contempt. "My name is Ilara," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I think I can help." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone snickered. The Alpha's second-in-command, Gabriel, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes who had always looked through me as if I were glass, stepped forward menacingly. "This is no time for attention-seeking from rejected Omegas," he growled. "Alpha, let me remove her." But Thaddeus held up a hand, stopping him. Desperation had made him willing to listen to anyone, even me. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. The bracelet was scalding now, but strangely it didn't hurt. Instead, it seemed to pulse with energy that traveled up my arm and into my chest. Words came to me that I didn't recognize, knowledge I hadn't known I possessed. "I need to see him," I said simply. "Alone." The outrage was immediate. Gabriel's face contorted with fury. "Absolutely not. We don't know what she might do. She could be working for our enemies." "What enemies would bother recruiting me?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I'm nobody." Something flickered in the Alpha's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or merely the madness of a father watching his son die. "Take her to him," he commanded, silencing the protests with a glare. "I'll be watching from the doorway. If you make one wrong move..." He didn't need to finish the threat. Gabriel's grip on my arm was bruising as he escorted me up the grand staircase to the family wing, a part of the house I'd never entered before. 2 guards flanked an ornate door, stepping aside reluctantly at the Alpha's nod. 5 minutes, Gabriel hissed in my ear before shoving me inside and pulling the door partially closed. The heir's room was spacious but dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the daylight. The air was thick with the scent of illness and impending death. In the massive bed lay Dominic, once the embodiment of werewolf vitality, now reduced to a pale shadow. His golden hair was dull and plastered to his forehead with sweat. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. For a moment, I froze. What had I been thinking? I wasn't a healer. I was just a rejected Omega with a burning bracelet and a head full of my grandmother's cryptic sayings. But as I approached the bed, the bracelet grew impossibly warmer, and with the heat came certainty. I knew what to do, though I couldn't have explained how I knew. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed and took one of Dominic's hands in mine. His skin was cold and clammy, the veins beneath it traced with unnatural black lines, the visible path of the poison through his system. With my other hand, I touched my bracelet, which now glowed with a faint silvery light. "What are you doing?" came the Alpha's suspicious voice from the doorway. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I think my grandmother did." I closed my eyes and let instinct guide me. The bracelet's warmth spread through me, pooling in my chest and then flowing down my arm into Dominic's hand. I felt it as a tangible current, a river of light pushing against the darkness in his veins. In my mind's eye, I could see the poison, a writhing black entity consuming him from within. I pushed harder with the light, surrounding the darkness, containing it, and then slowly, deliberately, drawing it out through our connected hands. The pain hit me suddenly and viciously as the poison transferred to my body. I gasped but held on tighter. The bracelet pulsed rhythmically now, and I understood its purpose. It wasn't just an heirloom, it was a conduit, a tool for the healing magic in my bloodline. It wouldn't let the poison harm me. Instead, it converted the dark energy, neutralizing it. Distantly, I heard voices raised in alarm, felt hands trying to pull me away. I resisted, holding on to Dominic with all my strength. "Not yet," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Almost done." The last of the poison left him in a rush that made my vision go white with pain. I slumped forward, my energy completely depleted. The bracelet's glow faded, though it remained warm against my skin. Chaos erupted around me. Someone yanked me away from the bed. Gabriel's voice cut through the confusion, accusing me of witchcraft, of making things worse. But then, another voice silenced them all. Weak, but clear. Wait. Dominic had opened his eyes. The unnatural black lines were receding from his skin, his color improving by the second. He was looking directly at me, confusion and wonder battling on his face. "What did you do?" he asked hoarsely. Before I could answer, the room spun around me and I collapsed into darkness. When I awoke, I was back in my small room in the servants' quarters. But something had changed. The air felt different, charged somehow. My bracelet had returned to its normal temperature, the patterns once again static. Mara sat beside my bed, her expression unreadable. When she saw I was awake, she pressed a cup of water to my lips. "What happened?" I asked after drinking thirstily. "You tell me," she replied. "The air is recovering. The doctors can't explain it. The poison is gone from his system." Relief flooded through me, but was quickly followed by uncertainty. "And the Alpha? What does he—" "He's with his son," Mara said carefully. "But he's ordered that you're to be moved from the servants' quarters immediately." My heart sank. Of course. I'd revealed myself as something unusual, dangerous perhaps. They would exile me now, or worse. "Where?" I whispered. Mara's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "To the guest quarters in the family wing. Temporarily," he said, "until they figure out what to do with you." I stared at her, unable to process this unexpected turn. "The guest quarters? Near the Alpha family? And," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "the air has been asking for you. Repeatedly." The words hung in the air between us, laden with implications neither of us dared voice. For an Omega to be summoned by the air? It wasn't done. Not unless— "Rest now," Mara said, standing abruptly. "You'll need your strength for whatever comes next." As she left, I touched my bracelet, tracing the familiar patterns with my fingertip. My grandmother's final words to me came flooding back. "When the time comes, you'll be more than they ever allowed you to be." Outside, the rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden beam across my bed. For the first time since my rejection, I felt something like hope unfurling in my chest. Dangerous, perhaps, but impossible to ignore. Because the air was alive, and he was asking for me. The guest quarters were nothing like my tiny room in the servants' wing. Here, the ceiling soared overhead, intricate woodwork framing a chandelier that cast dancing patterns of light across richly carpeted floors. The bed was wider than any I'd ever slept in, draped with linens so fine they felt like water between my fingers. But for all its grandeur, the room felt like a beautiful prison. I'd been here for 3 days, attended by a rotating staff of betas who treated me with a strange mixture of deference and suspicion, bringing meals and fresh clothes but answering none of my questions. No one would tell me about Dominic's condition beyond vague assurances that he continued to improve. No one would explain why the Alpha had moved me here, or why I wasn't permitted to leave the room. And most frustratingly, no one would tell me why. If the air was truly asking for me, I hadn't been allowed to see him. I paced the length of the room again, my reflection fragmenting and reforming in the ornate mirror as I passed. The person staring back at me was simultaneously familiar and foreign. The servants had bathed me while I was unconscious after the healing, dressing me in clothes finer than any I'd ever owned. A simple dress of pale blue silk that made my light blonde hair seem almost silver in contrast. The dark circles under my eyes had faded, and some of the hollowness had left my cheeks. I looked presentable, almost like I belonged in such surroundings. But I didn't belong, and the silent treatment was a pointed reminder of that fact. My fingers found the bracelet again, a habit I'd developed when anxious. Since the healing, it had remained dormant, no unusual warmth, no glowing, just a piece of silver jewelry, albeit one that had apparently channeled some long-forgotten family magic. "What am I supposed to do now, grandmother?" I whispered to the empty room. "You never told me what comes after." A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I tensed, expecting another silent beta with a meal tray or fresh towels. Instead, a woman I'd never seen before entered, tall, regal, with with streaks of silver in her dark hair and eyes that assessed me with unsettling directness. I didn't need to be told who she was. Her bearing announced it clearly enough. Luna Alexandra, the Alpha's mate and Dominic's mother. I dropped immediately into the formal posture of respect. Head bowed, eyes lowered, hands clasped at my waist. My heart hammered in my chest. The Luna rarely interacted with pack members outside the inner circle, and certainly never with rejected Omegas. "Stand straight," she commanded, her voice cool but not unkind. "Look at me." I obeyed, fighting the lifetime of conditioning that screamed at me to keep my gaze lowered in the presence of such dominant wolves. Alexandra circled me slowly, studying me from all angles. I fought the urge to fidget under her scrutiny. "You're thinner than is healthy," she remarked finally. "Has the food not been to your liking?" "The food is wonderful," I replied carefully. "I just haven't had much appetite." "Understandable. Healing takes a toll on the healer as well as the healed." She gestured to a pair of chairs by the window. "Sit with me." We settled into the chairs, sunlight warming the space between us. Alexandra continued to study me, her expression unreadable. "My son claims you pulled the poison from his body with your bare hands," she said finally. "He says he watched it travel through your connected palms, black energy flowing into silver light. The doctors call it delirium, a side effect of his brush with death." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you call it?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know what to call it. I only know what I felt." "And what did you feel, Ilara?" The sound of my name on her lips startled me. I hadn't expected her to know it. I felt the poison, like a living darkness, and something pushing through me to combat it. Light or energy, channeled through my grandmother's bracelet. I touched the silver band reflexively. She told me our family had healing abilities, but I never understood what she meant until that moment. Alexandra's gaze dropped to the bracelet, her eyes narrowing slightly. "May I see it?" I hesitated only a moment before unclasping it and placing it in her outstretched palm. She examined it carefully, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. "Do you know what these symbols mean?" she asked. "No. My grandmother never explained them. They're ancient wolf script, from before our kind split into packs and established territories." She traced one of the swirls. "This one represents balance, and this," her nail tapped against a more angular marking, "means bridge between worlds. The whole piece speaks of healing and harmony." She handed it back to me. "It's a powerful talisman from a time when our kind valued different strengths than we do today." I clasped the bracelet back around my wrist, feeling a new reverence for it. "Why are you telling me this?" Alexandra's lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because my mate believes you may have been sent by our enemies to infiltrate our pack through our son. And I'm trying to decide if he's right." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I would never." "So you say." She held up a hand to silence me. "But consider our position. Our son, heir to one of the strongest packs in the region, falls mysteriously ill. 100 doctors fail to cure him. Then a rejected Omega with no previous indication of healing abilities suddenly saves him with an ancient magic few remember." Her eyes hardened. "You must admit it seems convenient." "I've lived in this pack my whole life," I protested. "I've never had contact with any rivals." "Which would make you the perfect sleeper agent." She sighed, some of the hardness leaving her expression. "I don't necessarily believe that's what you are, Ilara, but others do. Gabriel in particular is convinced you poisoned Dominic yourself, just to heroically save him and gain favor." The injustice of the accusation burned through me. If I wanted to poison the heir, why would I then heal him? I could have just let him die, unless your goal wasn't his death, but his gratitude. His attachment. She leaned forward slightly. "My son hasn't stopped talking about you since he regained consciousness. He demands to see you, insists there was a connection formed during the healing. Do you know what that means to our kind, especially between an unmated heir and an Omega?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Of course I knew. Pack lore was full of such stories. rare instances where a life-saving act created a bond that superseded all pack protocols and traditions. But such things were legends, not reality, and certainly not something that would happen to me. I didn't do anything to create a connection, I said quietly. I only wanted to help. Alexandra studied me for a long moment. I believe you, she said finally. But that doesn't solve our problem. She stood abruptly. Come with me. Where are we going? I asked, rising uncertainly. To see my son. It's time to put his connection theory to the test. My heart leapt to my throat. But the Alpha is my mate, and while his concern for our son is admirable, his judgment has been clouded by fear. Sometimes a mother's intuition is more valuable than an Alpha's caution. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Besides, if I'm wrong about you, I'll know it the moment you're in the same room with him, and then you'll have far more to fear from me than from Thaddeus. I had no choice but to follow her through the halls of the family wing, acutely aware of the shocked stares from the pack members we passed. An Omega walking freely in the Alpha's domain, accompanied by the Luna herself, it was unprecedented. Alexandra led me to a different room than the one where I'd found Dominic dying. This one was brighter, with large windows overlooking the pack's ancestral forest. Dominic sat propped against pillows in a chair by the window, a blanket draped over his legs despite the warmth of the day. He was still pale, but the deathly gray had left his skin, and his golden hair had regained some of its luster. He was staring out at the forest, a distant expression on his face. He didn't notice our entrance until his mother spoke. "I've brought someone to see you," Alexandra said. Dominic turned, and the change that came over his face when he saw me was immediate and startling. His eyes widened, color rushed to his cheeks, and he straightened in his chair with a wince that suggested he was still in pain. "Elara," he breathed, the single word carrying a weight I couldn't comprehend. Something strange happened when he spoke my name. The bracelet warmed against my skin. Not the burning heat of the healing, but a gentle pulsing warmth that seemed to echo the sudden acceleration of my heartbeat. A faint silver glow emanated from beneath the metal. Dominic's eyes dropped to my wrist, and he extended his own arm, pushing up his sleeve to reveal an identical glow emanating from beneath his skin, right where I had gripped him during the healing. Alexandra inhaled sharply. "By the moon," she whispered. "You feel it too, don't you?" Dominic asked me, ignoring his mother's reaction. "This connection. Like a thread binding us together." I nodded mutely, unable to find words for the sensation thrumming between us. "What have you done to my son?" The voice came from behind us, harsh with accusation. Alpha Thaddeus stood in the doorway, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Behind him loomed Gabriel, his expression darkly triumphant, as though my presence in the heir's room confirmed his worst suspicions. "I invited her here," Alexandra said calmly, stepping between her mate and me, "to confirm what our son has been telling us." "And what is that, exactly?" Gabriel demanded, pushing forward. "That she's ensorcelled him with some rejected Omega's desperate magic?" "That they're connected," Alexandra corrected. "Look at their marks. They glow in response to each other." "Which marks?" Gabriel spat. "Evidence of her manipulation. Or evidence of something much older than your limited understanding can comprehend," Alexandra countered, a thread of steel entering her voice. "Something from the early days of our kind, when certain Omegas were revered for abilities that complemented Alpha strength instead of mirroring it." Thaddeus stepped closer, his attention fixed on the matching glow of my bracelet and the mark on his son's arm. "What are you saying, Alexandra?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm saying our son might have found his true mate in the most unexpected place, and that we would be fools to ignore what the old magic is telling us." Dominic reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine hesitantly. The contact sent a jolt through my system, the bracelet's glow intensifying. "Father," he said, his voice stronger than it had been moments ago. "I know how this looks, but when she pulled the poison from me, something happened. I felt whole. For the first time." His eyes found mine, filled with wonder and confusion. "I don't understand it any more than you do, but I can't ignore it. I should have been terrified, surrounded by the most powerful wolves in the pack, the center of a controversy I barely understood. But standing there with Dominic's fingers tentatively entwined with mine, the warmth of our connection humming between us, I felt strangely calm, as though some part of me had always known this moment would come. "This is absurd," Gabriel growled. "Alpha, you cannot seriously be considering this manipulation as legitimate. She was rejected at the traditional ceremony for good reason. She's too weak, her bloodline unremarkable. She would bear weak offspring, diluting the pack's strength." I flinched at the cruel assessment, but Dominic's hand tightened around mine. "My son nearly died," Thaddeus said slowly, his eyes never leaving our joined hands. 100 doctors, the best in all territories, could do nothing, yet she saved him when all hope was lost. He raised his gaze to mine, scrutinizing. "How?" "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "My grandmother told me our bloodline carried healing abilities, but they've been dormant for generations. The bracelet seems to channel it somehow." "Healing abilities," Thaddeus repeated thoughtfully. "When was the last time our pack had a true healer, Alexandra?" 4 generations ago," she answered promptly. "Before the Northern Wars, when we began prizing warrior bloodlines above all else." Gabriel made a sound of disgust. "You cannot be taking this seriously. Even if she does have some minor healing ability, that doesn't make her worthy of—" "Silence." Thaddeus's command wasn't loud, but Gabriel's mouth snapped shut instantly. The Alpha turned to his son. "Do you truly believe this connection is genuine, Dominic? Not just gratitude or confusion after your ordeal?" Dominic looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. I wondered what he saw, the rejected Omega, the unexpected healer, or something else entirely. When he spoke, there was certainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. "I know it is. I can feel her presence even when she's not in the room. I've been aware of her location in the pack house every moment since I woke. When she came closer just now, it was like—" He searched for words, like a compass finding north. Gabriel made another noise of protest, but fell silent under Thaddeus's warning glare. "And you?" the Alpha asked, turning to me. "What do you feel?" The question caught me off guard. No one, especially not the Alpha, had ever asked about my feelings before. I spoke carefully, knowing my answer could determine not just my future, but possibly my survival. "I feel a connection I can't explain," I said honestly. "But I don't expect anything from it. I know my place in the pack hierarchy." "Your place," Alexandra said softly, "may not be what any of us thought it was." A heavy silence fell over the room, thick with unspoken implications. Dominic's fingers remained intertwined with mine, warm and reassuring despite the uncertainty surrounding us. Finally, Thaddeus straightened his shoulders, authority settling around him like a cloak. "This situation requires careful consideration. In the meantime, Ilara will remain in the guest quarters, but no longer as a prisoner. She will be treated as a—" he hesitated, searching for the appropriate term, "as a guest of the Alpha family." Gabriel's face darkened with anger, but he knew better than to contradict his Alpha directly. Instead, he bowed stiffly and left the room, the tension easing slightly with his departure. "And," Thaddeus continued, "she will assist in Dominic's continued recovery, since their connection seems to strengthen him." I nodded, relief and apprehension battling within me. I wasn't being cast out or punished, but neither was I fully accepted. I existed now in some undefined space between rejection and belonging. As if reading my thoughts, Dominic squeezed my hand gently. "It's a start," he whispered, too quietly for his parents to hear. The warmth of his smile reached his eyes, creating fine lines at the corners that spoke of a kindness I hadn't expected from the Alpha's heir. For the first time since my rejection ceremony, I allowed myself to smile back. Days melted into weeks as I settled into my new role as Dominic's unofficial healer. Each morning, I would walk from my guest quarters to his rooms, accompanied by a stoic guard. For my protection, Thaddeus claimed, though we both knew it was equally to monitor my movements. Dominic's recovery progressed steadily under my care, though care might have been too formal a word for what transpired between us. Most days we simply talked. I would sit in the chair beside his bed, as the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between us, and listen as he spoke of his childhood, his training, his hopes for the pack's future. In turn, I shared fragments of my own life, my grandmother's mysterious teachings, my years in the shadows of pack hierarchy, the small joys I'd found despite my rejection. When the poison's lingering effects flared, causing pain to shoot through his limbs or his breathing to grow labored, I would take his hand and let the connection between us strengthen. The bracelet would warm, its silver light pulsing in time with our heartbeats, drawing out the last traces of darkness from his system. Each time, the process became easier, less draining for me, more natural for us both. And with each passing day, something shifted between us, a slow, tentative unfurling of trust and understanding that neither of us dared name. "Why did you reject me at the ceremony?" I asked him one afternoon, the question slipping out before I could reconsider. We were in the pack gardens, Dominic taking his first extended walk outdoors since his illness. The late summer blooms perfumed the air around us, and bees hummed lazily among the flowers. He stopped walking, his expression clouding. I didn't. But the announcement wasn't my decision. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as signaling his frustration. My father and the council presented me with their chosen candidates. Your name wasn't among them. I absorbed this information slowly, uncertain how to feel about it. So you didn't even know I was an option. I knew who you were, he said quietly. I'd seen you in the pack house, but Gabriel told me you'd declined to be presented, that you preferred service roles to being considered as a potential mate. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. I submitted my name to the council, as is every Omega's right. I waited for hours outside the ceremonial hall, only to be told I'd been rejected without even being seen. Dominic's face darkened with anger. Gabriel, he muttered. It had to be his doing. He controls the council nominations. He reached for my hand, his touch gentle despite the fury in his eyes. I'm sorry, Elara, if I'd known... He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air between us. If he'd known, would he have chosen me? Before the poisoning, before our connection. It seemed impossible to believe, yet the genuine regret in his eyes made me wonder. It doesn't matter now, I said, trying to sound more convincing than I felt. The past is done. Is it? He lifted my wrist, his thumb brushing over the bracelet. Sometimes I think the past reaches forward to shape our futures in ways we never expect. Before I could respond, a shadow fell across our path. Gabriel stood before us, his mouth twisted in a cold approximation of a smile. Since the confrontation in Dominic's sick room, he'd been conspicuously absent from our daily routines, a fact for which I'd been profoundly grateful. How domestic, he remarked, his gaze flicking dismissively over our joined hands. The heir and his healer enjoying the gardens while pack business awaits attention. Dominic straightened, his posture shifting subtly into one of authority, despite his still recovering body. The Alpha himself approved these walks for my recovery, Gabriel. What pack business requires my immediate attention? The Blackwater delegation has arrived early. They're requesting an audience with the future Alpha. Gabriel's emphasis on future Alpha carried an unmistakable implication that Dominic wasn't fulfilling his duties, that he was neglecting his responsibilities for my company. Dominic nodded, his expression growing serious. Of course. I'll meet with them immediately. He turned to me, apology in his eyes. Elara? Go, I said, forcing a smile. I know the way back to my quarters. I'll escort her, Gabriel offered with false solicitude. To ensure her safety. The last thing I wanted was Gabriel's company, but I recognized the political necessity of Dominic's meeting. The Blackwater Pack controlled crucial territory to the south. Their goodwill was essential for our security. That won't be necessary, Dominic said firmly. She has her regular guard. He nodded toward the beta who had been trailing us at a discreet distance throughout our walk. Gabriel inclined his head in acquiescence, but something in his eyes made my skin crawl. A calculating coldness that promised this interaction wasn't over. Until tomorrow, then, Dominic said to me, his fingers squeezing mine briefly before releasing them. To Gabriel, his tone became more formal. Lead the way to the delegation. I watched them walk away, Dominic's stride growing more confident with each day of healing. Though still lacking the fluid grace I imagined he'd possessed before the poisoning. Gabriel walked half a step behind him, his back rigid with what looked like barely contained resentment. "Miss?" My guard approached, gesturing toward the path back to the house. "We should return before the evening meal." I nodded and followed him, my thoughts still with Dominic and the revelation about my rejected candidacy. If Gabriel had intentionally kept my name from the selection process, what else might he be capable of? And why would the Pax Beta, second only to the Alpha family in status, concern himself with preventing a seemingly insignificant Omega from being considered as a mate? The answer came to me as we entered the shadowed interior of the pack house. Gabriel wanted the position of heir for himself. With no son of his own, Thaddeus would be forced to name a successor if anything happened to Dominic. As the current Beta, Gabriel would be the obvious choice. My steps faltered as the implications sank in. If Gabriel had orchestrated my exclusion from the mating ceremony, might he also have been behind Dominic's poisoning? The thought sent ice through my veins. But before I could pursue this line of thinking further, a commotion at the end of the hallway caught my attention. A group of unfamiliar wolves was being escorted through the main entrance. Tall, broad-shouldered figures with an air of barely contained aggression. The Blackwater delegation, I assumed. At their center walked a woman whose presence seemed to command the space around her, raven-haired and striking, with eyes that assessed the pack house and its occupants with cool appraisal as they passed, her gaze locked with mine. Something flashed in her expression. Recognition, though I was certain we'd never met. She slowed, her nostrils flaring slightly as she scented the air between us, then her eyes dropped to my wrist, to the bracelet that had begun to warm slightly in her presence. "Hurry along, miss," my guard murmured, placing a hand under my elbow to guide me toward the stairs. "Those aren't wolves to trifle with." I allowed him to lead me away, but glanced back once to find the woman still watching me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The encounter left me unsettled, though I couldn't have explained why. Back in my quarters, I paced restlessly, unable to shake the foreboding that had settled over me. The bracelet remained warm against my skin, not the healing warmth it emanated with Dominic, but something different. A warning, perhaps. A soft knock at my door interrupted my anxious circling. I opened it to find Mara, the head housekeeper who had first brought me to the great hall the night of Dominic's healing. "The Luna requests your presence for dinner," she said, her expression betraying nothing of what she thought about this unprecedented invitation. Dinner? With the Alpha family? I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. "And the Blackwater delegation," Mara added. "I've brought appropriate attire." She gestured to a garment draped over her arm, a dress of deep forest green that looked far more formal than anything I'd worn since moving to the guest quarters. "Why would they want me there?" I asked, even as I accepted the dress. Mara's expression softened slightly. "Things are changing, Alara. Your position in the pack is evolving. That's all I know." She helped me into the dress, which fit as though it had been made for me, the fabric flowing like water over my curves. As she fastened the back, she added in a whisper, "Be careful tonight. The Blackwater wolves are dangerous, especially their emissary." "The woman with the dark hair?" Mara nodded. "Elena Blackwater, daughter of their Alpha, and rumored to be more ambitious than 10 men combined. She's here ostensibly to discuss territory boundaries, but," she trailed off, shaking her head. "But what?" "But she's never shown interest in such mundane matters before. Some say she's really here to assess Dominic as a potential mate. A union between our packs would be politically advantageous." The words struck me with unexpected force. Of course Dominic would eventually need to choose a mate, an appropriate one, from a strong bloodline, someone who could strengthen the pack's position. Whatever connection had formed between us during the healing, it didn't change the fundamental reality of pack politics. "There," Mara said, stepping back to assess her work. She'd arranged my light blonde hair in an elegant twist, with a few soft tendrils framing my face. "You look..." She hesitated, seemingly surprised by her own observation. "You look like you belong at that table." I managed a weak smile, though her words did little to calm my nerves. "Thank you, Mara." She squeezed my hand briefly before leaving. Remember who you are, Alara, not what they've told you you are. The formal dining hall was intimidating in its grandeur. High ceilings with exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall, and a table long enough to seat 30 comfortably. Tonight, however, only about a dozen places were set, the Alpha family at one end, the Blackwater delegation at the other, with a scattering of council members in between. Conversation stopped as I entered, all eyes turning to assess me. I felt my cheeks warm under the scrutiny, but forced myself to walk steadily to the seat, indicated by a hovering servant, directly across from Dominic, who sat at his father's right hand. Elena Blackwater was seated beside him, her dark beauty even more striking in the golden candlelight. "Ah, here she is," Thaddeus said, his tone neutral. "Elena, may I present Alara, my son's healer?" Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We saw each other earlier, though we weren't formally introduced." How fascinating to meet a true healer. Such abilities are rare in these modern times. Something in her phrasing caught my attention. Not these days, or nowadays, but these modern times, as though she stood apart from them somehow. "My abilities are modest," I replied carefully. "I'm still learning their limits. Are you?" She tilted her head, studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "Or are you just beginning to remember what your bloodline has always known?" Before I could respond to this cryptic question, Dominic interjected. "Alara's healing saved my life when no doctor could. Our pack owes her a debt of gratitude." He smiled at me across the table, the warmth in his eyes a balm to my uncertainty. "Indeed," Elena agreed, though her tone suggested less gratitude than calculation. "A valuable asset to your pack." Such healers were once highly prized, sought after by alphas across territories. Her gaze shifted to Thaddeus. In the old days, a pack with a true healer was considered blessed by the moon itself. Thaddeus nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with this line of conversation. Times change. Strength and strategic alliances protect packs now. Do they? Elena's smile sharpened. And yet, when poison struck at the heart of your strength, it was ancient magic that saved you, not modern medicine or military might. The implied criticism hung in the air, creating a tension that was broken only by the arrival of the first course. As servants placed steaming bowls of soup before each guest, conversation shifted to safer topics: territorial boundaries, shared hunting grounds, recent changes in pack law across regions. I ate silently, keenly aware of the currents flowing beneath the polite discussion. Elena, while engaging diplomatically with Thaddeus, kept finding reasons to touch Dominic's arm or lean close to speak privately in his ear. Each time she did, I felt a strange twinge from my bracelet, almost like a protest. Midway through the main course, Elena turned her attention back to me. "Tell me, Alara, is healing your only gift, or does your family lineage carry other talents?" All conversation at the table ceased, attention focusing on our exchange. I set down my fork carefully, aware of the dangerous territory this question represented. In many packs, abilities beyond the natural werewolf traits were viewed with suspicion, even fear. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "My grandmother died before she could teach me everything about our heritage." "A pity," Elena murmured. "The old bloodlines carried such fascinating gifts." Healing, yes, but also foresight, communion with ancestors, even weatherworking in some cases. She sipped her wine, her eyes never leaving my face. "Your bracelet, for instance. It's not just a conduit for your healing, is it? It's a family talisman, passed down through generations of women in your line." I stared at her, unsettled by her knowledge. "How did you—" "My family remembers the old ways," she said simply. "We keep records of the ancient bloodlines and their gifts. Your maternal lineage is of particular interest. It stretches back to before the Great Divide, when werewolves lived as one pack across these territories." Thaddeus cleared his throat, clearly displeased with this turn in the conversation. Fascinating as these historical discussions may be, we have more pressing matters to address. The disputed hunting grounds along the river, for instance. Elena inclined her head respectfully, but didn't take her eyes off me. Of course, Alpha. Business before pleasure, but the look she gave me held a clear message. This conversation isn't over. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur of diplomatic exchanges and thinly veiled negotiations. Throughout it all, I felt Elena's gaze returning to me again and again, assessing, calculating. When Dominic occasionally caught my eye across the table, offering small smiles of encouragement, her attention would sharpen, noting each interaction between us with evident interest. As dessert was being served, a commotion outside the dining hall drew everyone's attention. Moments later, a guard burst in, his expression grim. "Alpha," he said, bowing hastily to Thaddeus. "Forgive the interruption, but there's been an incident at the northern boundary. Hunters from the Riverclaw pack have crossed into our territory and aren't responding to warnings." Thaddeus rose immediately, authority emanating from him in almost tangible waves. "Excuse me," he said to the assembled guests. "I must attend to this. Gabriel, with me." Gabriel, who had been seated far down the table, stood with evident satisfaction, finally called to perform his duties as Beta. "I'll come too," Dominic said, pushing back his chair. "No," Thaddeus responded firmly. "You're still recovering. Stay and entertain our guests." The command was clear, brooking no argument. Dominic subsided, though frustration flashed across his face. As Thaddeus and Gabriel left with several council members in tow, the atmosphere in the dining hall shifted, becoming less formal, but somehow more charged. Elena leaned toward Dominic, placing her hand on his arm with practiced familiarity. "Your father is right to be cautious about your health. The Riverclaw pack is notoriously aggressive. No doubt this is a minor provocation, not worth risking your continued recovery." Dominic nodded stiffly, though I could see he chafed at being treated as an invalid. Our eyes met briefly across the table, and I tried to convey my understanding of his frustration. Alexandra, who had remained largely silent throughout dinner, suddenly spoke. "Perhaps this would be a good opportunity for our young people to become better acquainted. Dominic, why don't you show Elena and her companions the Moonlight Garden? It's particularly beautiful this time of year." "An excellent suggestion," Elena agreed, rising gracefully. "I've heard much of your famous gardens." She extended her hand to Dominic expectantly. He hesitated for just a moment, his gaze flickering to me, before standing and offering Elena his arm with the formal courtesy his position demanded. As the Blackwater delegation and their potential future Alpha left the dining hall, I remained seated, uncertain of my place in this new configuration. Alexandra studied me across the nearly empty table, her expression thoughtful. "You should join them, Alara." I looked up, surprised. "I wasn't invited." "Consider yourself invited now." She rose, smoothing her dress with practiced elegance. "My son values your company, and I think you'll find tonight's conversations in the garden informative." As I stood to follow her suggestion, the bracelet warmed against my wrist, not in warning this time, but almost in encouragement. Whatever waited for me in the Moonlight Garden, my grandmother's gift seemed to be urging me forward to face it. "Thank you, Luna," I said, gathering my courage. Alexandra's smile held a hint of something I couldn't quite interpret. Knowledge, perhaps, or anticipation. "Remember, Alara, in the old stories, it's often the ones deemed weakest who ultimately save the pack. Not through brute strength, but through qualities others have forgotten to value." With those cryptic words echoing in my mind, I stepped out of the dining hall and into the cool evening air, following the sound of voices toward the Moonlight Garden and whatever revelations awaited me there. The Moonlight Garden earned its name honestly. Designed to bloom primarily at night, it featured pale flowers that seemed to glow under the moon's caress, their petals unfurling to release heady perfumes that intensified after sunset. Stone pathways wound between beds of ghostly white roses and luminous night jasmine, creating intimate alcoves where pack members could find privacy for conversation or courtship. I followed the sound of voices, guided by instinct and the persistent warmth of my bracelet. The night air carried Elena's laughter, melodic and practiced, along with the deeper murmur of Dominic's responses. As I rounded a corner, I found them seated on a stone bench beneath an ancient willow tree, its silvery leaves creating a curtain of privacy around them. Elena was leaning close to Dominic, one hand resting lightly on his forearm as she spoke in hushed tones. Neither noticed my approach immediately, and I hesitated, suddenly uncertain of my place in this tableau. The Blackwater delegation members had dispersed throughout the garden, giving their emissary privacy with the potential mate they had clearly come to assess. Before I could retreat, Elena looked up, her dark eyes finding mine with unsettling precision. "Ah, the healer joins us," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Come closer, Ilara. We were just discussing the old bloodlines." Dominic turned, and the relief that washed over his face at the sight of me was almost palpable. "Ilara," he said, shifting slightly to create space on the bench. "Please, sit with us." I moved forward, aware of Elena's gaze tracking my every movement as I settled onto the stone seat, careful to maintain a proper distance from Dominic despite the subtle pull I felt toward him. "As I was telling your heir," Elena continued smoothly, "the relationship between alphas and healers was once considered sacred. A pairing of complementary strengths, power and nurturing, strength and restoration, leadership and empathy." Her eyes flicked meaningfully between Dominic and me. The ancient texts speak of such unions as blessed by the moon itself. Dominic's expression remained diplomatically neutral. Fascinating history, though pack dynamics have evolved considerably since those times. Have they? Elena's smile turned enigmatic. Or have we simply forgotten what once made our kind truly powerful? She turned to me directly. "Your bracelet. May I see it again?" The request seemed innocuous enough, yet something in me resisted. "It doesn't leave my wrist," I replied, more firmly than I'd intended. Rather than taking offense, Elena's smile widened with what looked like approval, as it should be. Such talismans are bound to their bearers. Removing it would weaken your connection to your heritage. She leaned forward, dropping her voice to a near whisper. "But I wonder if you know what else it can do, beyond healing." "Elena," Dominic interrupted, a warning note in his voice. "Ilara is still discovering the extent of her abilities. This isn't the time for speculation." Elena sat back, conceding the point with graceful ease that nonetheless suggested she'd return to the topic when conditions favored her. "Of course. Forgive my curiosity, it's just so rare to encounter a true healer in these diminished times." The conversation shifted to safer topics. Territorial agreements, recent changes in pack laws across regions, mutual acquaintances in neighboring territories. Throughout it all, I remained largely silent, observing the political dance between them. Elena was clearly practiced at these exchanges, her every response calibrated to position the Blackwater pack advantageously, while suggesting that an alliance through mating would benefit both territories. Dominic matched her diplomatic skill, neither committing to nor rejecting any proposition outright. But beneath his political poise, I sensed his weariness. His recovery, though progressing well, was still incomplete, and the evening's formalities were taxing his strength. As if sensing my concern, he met my gaze briefly. The connection between us hummed, my bracelet warming in response to his proximity. Elena noticed the silent exchange, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The moon is high," she observed, glancing skyward. "And you're still recovering, Heir. Perhaps we should continue these discussions tomorrow when you've rested." "A sensible suggestion," Dominic agreed, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "I'll escort you back to the guest wing." "No need," Elena replied smoothly. "My guards will accompany me." She rose in a fluid movement, her dark gown rippling like water in the moonlight. "Besides, I imagine your healer has observations about your condition after this evening's exertions." The statement managed to acknowledge my role, while simultaneously relegating me to a position of servitude, a neat political maneuver that I couldn't help but admire, even as it stung. "Until tomorrow, then," Dominic said formally. Elena inclined her head in acknowledgement, then turned to me with that same enigmatic smile. "We'll speak again soon, healer. There's much I'd like to discuss with you. Privately." With that parting statement, she glided away, her guards materializing from the shadows to fall into step behind her. As her footsteps faded, Dominic exhaled heavily, some of the formal rigidity leaving his posture. "Thank you for joining us." Her interrogation was becoming intense. "She's very focused on alliances," I observed carefully. "On a mating alliance, specifically." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "My father has been considering the match for years. The Blackwater territory borders ours to the south and east. Combined, we would control the entire river valley. A powerful union, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the hollow feeling expanding in my chest. A political union, he corrected, his eyes finding mine in the moonlight, which is very different from— He didn't finish the sentence, but his gaze dropped to my bracelet, which glowed softly in the darkness. Almost involuntarily, I reached for his hand, needing to confirm what I already knew, that the mark on his wrist would respond in kind, glowing to match the light of my family's talisman. As our fingers touched, the connection between us surged, stronger than ever before. The garden around us seemed to fade slightly as awareness of each other intensified. His steady heartbeat, the lingering fatigue in his muscles, the warm current of his thoughts brushing against mine. "What is happening between us?" I whispered, both frightened and exhilarated by the deepening bond. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice equally hushed. "But I can't ignore it. Every day the connection grows stronger. I can sense your emotions now, even when we're in separate rooms." His fingers tightened around mine. "Can you feel mine?" I nodded, unable to form words for the complex swirl of sensations flooding through our joined hands. Beyond the physical awareness came emotions. His frustration at being treated as weak, his concern about pack politics, and underlying it all, a warm regard for me that made my heart stutter in my chest. "Elena knows something about this," I said finally, finding my voice. "About my bracelet, about healers and alphas." She kept hinting at ancient connections between our bloodlines. Dominic's expression grew thoughtful. "The Blackwater Pack does maintain the most extensive historical records of any territory. They pride themselves on remembering the old ways." He hesitated. "Do you think we should trust her insights?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "She clearly has her own agenda. But if she has information about my abilities, about this connection between us, don't we need to hear it?" Before he could respond, a distant commotion reached us. Shouting voices, hurried footsteps approaching through the garden. Dominic rose, instantly alert, placing himself slightly in front of me in an instinctively protective stance. A young guard burst into the alcove, his expression harried. "Heir, you're needed immediately. The Alpha has returned from the northern border with news." "What news?" Dominic demanded. The guard's eyes darted to me, then back to Dominic. There was no Riverclaw incursion. It was a false report, meant to draw the Alpha and his guards away from the pack house. "A diversion," Dominic said grimly. "For what purpose?" "There's been an attempt to access the secured archives in the East Wing. The intruder was interrupted but escaped into the forest." Dominic's expression hardened. "One of the Blackwater delegation?" The guard shook his head. "Unknown." The scent was masked. He hesitated again. "But Alpha Thaddeus requests both your presence and the healers in his study. Immediately." We followed the guard through the moonlit gardens and back into the pack house, where an atmosphere of tension had replaced the earlier diplomatic formality. Pack members moved purposefully through the halls, some carrying weapons, others securing windows and doors. A security breach within the Alpha's domain was a serious matter, one that threatened not just physical safety, but the pack standing among neighboring territories. Thaddeus's study reflected his personality. Austere, traditional, dominated by a massive desk of ancient oak and walls lined with leather-bound records of pack history. The Alpha himself stood behind the desk, his face granite-hard with anger. Gabriel stood at his right hand, his expression a carefully neutral mask that nonetheless couldn't quite hide his satisfaction at the night's disruption. Alexandra occupied a chair near the window. Her posture relaxed despite the tension in the room. And to my surprise, Elena Blackwater was present as well, seated comfortably as though she'd been invited to a social gathering rather than an emergency council. "Dominic, Ilara," Thaddeus acknowledged our arrival with a curt nod. "We have a situation." "I've been informed of the breach," Dominic said, his voice steady with the authority he'd one day wield as Alpha. "What was the intruder seeking in the archives?" "That," Elena interjected smoothly, "is the crucial question, isn't it? Your archives contain centuries of pack history, treaties, bloodline records." Her gaze slid meaningfully to me. "Perhaps even documentation of certain rare abilities that have manifested recently." Gabriel's eyes narrowed at her words. Are you suggesting the breach is connected to our healer? The way he said, our healer, with barely disguised contempt, made my spine stiffen. But before I could respond, Alexandra spoke, her tone mild, but carrying undeniable authority. What Elena is suggesting, she said, is that someone may be interested in the same ancient connections between healers and alphas that she herself mentioned at dinner. Her gaze met Elena's in what appeared to be a silent communication between two powerful women. Isn't that right, emissary? Elena inclined her head, conceding the point with a small smile. Your Luna is perceptive, Alpha. Indeed, I believe the intruder was searching for specific historical records. Records that would confirm what I've been trying to explain about the healer's bloodline and its significance to your pack's future. Speak plainly, Thaddeus demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin with diplomatic maneuvering. What do you know that we don't? Elena's gaze swept the room, settling finally on me. The healer's bracelet bears markings of the ancient accord, a pact formed between the first alphas and the original healers. It granted extraordinary powers to both when they worked in tandem. She leaned forward slightly. In the old tales, when an alpha and a healer formed a life bond, their combined abilities could protect territories from threats no warrior could defeat alone. Old tales, Gabriel scoffed. Legends to entertain pups. Legends often contain kernels of truth, Elena countered smoothly, especially when evidence of those truths manifests before our eyes. She gestured to the mark on Dominic's wrist, which had begun to glow faintly in proximity to my bracelet. The Heir bears the mark of a life bond already forming. Deny it if you will, but the old magic recognizes what modern minds reject. Thaddeus's gaze fixed on the matching glow between his son's wrist and my bracelet. For a long moment, silence reigned in the study. This still doesn't explain the breach, Gabriel said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Or why we should trust Blackwater interpretations of our pack's business. Because? Elena replied, her voice hardening for the first time. The Blackwater pack isn't the only one who remembers the old ways. There are those who would use such knowledge, and such bonds, for their own purposes. She turned to Thaddeus directly. Tell me, Alpha, have you had any contact with the Shadow Crescent recently? The name sent a visible ripple of tension through the room. Even I, isolated as I'd been from pack politics, knew of the Shadow Crescent, a loose alliance of wolves who rejected traditional pack structures, operating in the margins between territories, rumored to practice forbidden rituals and ancient magics that modern packs had abandoned. We've had reports of their movement near our borders, Thaddeus admitted reluctantly. Nothing substantial. They're growing bolder, Elena said, gathering strength. And they have a particular interest in the old bloodlines, especially those with healing abilities. Her gaze returned to me, assessing. If they learn of a potential life bond forming between an alpha heir and a healer from one of the original bloodlines, they will act. Tonight's breach may have been their first move. Dominic stepped closer to me, the protective gesture unmistakable. Are you suggesting Alara is in danger? I'm suggesting you both are, Elena corrected. A life bond partially formed is vulnerable, susceptible to interference, manipulation, even severance. She spread her hands in a gesture that managed to be both apologetic and satisfied, as though events were unfolding exactly as she'd anticipated. Which is why I came with my proposal. Proposal, Thaddeus repeated, his tone wary. Elena rose gracefully from her chair, commanding the room's attention. The Blackwater Pack offers sanctuary and protection to your heir and his healer. Our territory contains ancient sites specifically designed to shelter and strengthen such bonds. Our elders remember the rituals needed to secure the connection against outside influence. Her smile was triumphant now, revealing the political advantage she'd been maneuvering toward all along. In exchange for this protection, we propose a formal alliance between our packs. Not through mating, but through something far older and more powerful. A tense silence followed Elena's proposal. The political implications were enormous. An alliance with the Blackwater Pack would shift the balance of power across territories, creating a combined force that other packs would be forced to respect or fear. But the cost of such protection remained unnamed, hovering in the air between us. And what would this sanctuary entail? Alexandra asked, her voice carefully neutral, though her eyes betrayed her concern. You speak of ancient sites and forgotten rituals, but offer few specifics. Elena inclined her head respectfully to the Luna. The details are necessarily guarded. What I can say is that deep within Blackwater territory lies the Sacred Grove, a place where the boundaries between worlds thin, where the moon's power concentrates. It is there that life bonds were traditionally sealed and strengthened against interference. Convenient, Gabriel interjected, his tone acidic. That this solution requires placing our heir and a suddenly important Omega directly into Blackwater territory, beyond our protection. Elena's smile tightened slightly. Your suspicion is understandable, Beta, but misplaced. The Sacred Grove has served all packs for centuries. It belongs to no single territory in spirit, though it happens to lie within our boundaries. She turned to Thaddeus. You need not decide immediately. But know that the Shadow Crescent grows stronger each moon cycle, and they will not hesitate to strike at a vulnerable bond if it serves their purposes. Thaddeus stood motionless, his expression unreadable as he considered the implications. Finally, he spoke. We will discuss this privately, as a pack. Elena, you and your delegation will remain our honored guests while we deliberate. It was a diplomatic dismissal, and Elena accepted it gracefully. Of course, Alpha. Such decisions require careful consideration. She moved toward the door, but paused beside me. Remember, healer, she said softly. Some gifts can only flourish in the right soil. With that cryptic remark, she departed, leaving a wake of tension behind her. As the door closed, Gabriel immediately seized the opportunity. This is clearly a Blackwater plot, he declared. They fabricate tales of danger, stage a breach of our archives, then conveniently offer protection within their territory? The breach was real enough, Thaddeus countered, and Elena's knowledge of the healer's bracelet and its significance seemed genuine, or well-researched to appear so, Gabriel argued. We cannot risk sending your heir into potential enemy territory based on ancient superstitions. Throughout this exchange, Dominic and I remained silent, though I could feel his frustration building through our connection. Finally, he spoke. What if Elena is right about the vulnerability of our bond? What if the Shadow Crescent does target us? Gabriel scoffed. This bond you believe you have with the Omega. Her name is Alara, Dominic interrupted, a edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. And what exists between us is real, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. Gabriel's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Alexandra rose from her chair, commanding attention without raising her voice. Perhaps, she suggested, we should seek verification from someone other than the Blackwater emissary, someone with no political stake in this matter. Thaddeus turned to her, his expression softening slightly. What do you propose? The Keeper of Records, she replied. Morgana has served 3 generations of Alphas with unwavering loyalty. If anyone can confirm whether Elena's claims about healer bloodlines and life bonds have historical basis, it is she. The suggestion seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. Even Gabriel couldn't object to consulting the pack's own historian, a beta woman so ancient that her actual age had become the subject of pack lore. Summon her, Thaddeus decided, immediately. As a guard was dispatched to fetch the keeper, Thaddeus turned to me directly for the first time since the meeting began. Ilera, he said, his voice carefully controlled. What do you sense from this situation? Does your ability tell you anything about the Blackwater offer? The question caught me off guard. No Alpha had ever asked for my insight before, certainly not in matters of pack security. I touched my bracelet instinctively, seeking guidance from the connection to my grandmother and the ancestors before her. The bracelet doesn't warn me against Elena, I said slowly, trying to articulate feelings I barely understood myself. But it doesn't fully trust her either. There's truth in what she says about the bond between Dominic and me, but her motivations go beyond simple protection. I looked up, meeting Thaddeus's searching gaze. "I believe there is genuine danger, but I'm not certain the Blackwater solution is our only option." Thaddeus nodded, seeming to weigh my words carefully. Before he could respond, the study door opened to admit the keeper of records, a diminutive woman whose advanced age had bent her spine but done nothing to dim the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She moved slowly, leaning on a gnarled wooden staff, her white hair twisted into an intricate braid that hung to her waist. "Alpha," she greeted Thaddeus, her voice surprisingly strong. "You've summoned me regarding the healer and the heir, I presume." Thaddeus's eyebrows rose in surprise. "How did you—" "The archives were breached tonight," Morgana interrupted, settling herself into the chair Elena had vacated. "The intruder sought specific texts, those concerning the ancient accord between alphas and healers." Her keen eyes found me, narrowing slightly as she examined my bracelet. "And now we have a healer wearing a talisman of the first pack, and an heir bearing the mark of a forming life bond. Even these old eyes can see the glow between you." "Then it's true?" Alexandra asked. "What the Blackwater emissary claims about their connection?" Morgana snorted softly. "The Blackwater pack remembers much, but interprets to suit their purposes. Yes, the ancient accord existed. Yes, when a true healer and an alpha or heir formed a life bond, their combined abilities were formidable." She tapped her staff against the floor for emphasis. "But such bonds cannot be forced or manipulated. They occur naturally or not at all." "And the Shadow Crescent?" Dominic asked. "Is there truth to Elena's warning about their interest in such bonds?" The Keeper's expression darkened. "The Shadow Crescent has always coveted power it doesn't understand. In the old texts, there are accounts of them attempting to harness or corrupt the energy of life bonds for their own rituals." She shook her head. "But the Blackwater protection comes with its own risks. Their sacred grove is powerful, yes, but power can be used in many ways." "What do you advise, Keeper?" Thaddeus asked, his tone respectful. Morgana fixed her gaze on Dominic and me, studying the subtle glow where our marks responded to each other. "The bond forming between them is genuine, but incomplete. In its current state, it is indeed vulnerable to interference." She paused, considering. "There is another place, neutral territory, where the bond could be sealed properly. The Moonstone Circle at the junction of our territories. That site hasn't been used in generations," Gabriel objected. "It's hardly secure. It is forgotten, which makes it safer than a known location like the Blackwater Grove," Morgana countered. "And it requires no political alliance to access. It belongs to all packs and none." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "Prepare for both possibilities. We will inform Elena that we're considering her offer, but make our own arrangements for the Moonstone Circle." He turned to Dominic and me. "Until we decide, you both remain within the pack house, under guard. If the Shadow Crescent is truly targeting this bond, we take no chances." The meeting concluded with assignments for increased security and preparations for a possible journey to either the Blackwater Sacred Grove or the forgotten Moonstone Circle. As we dispersed, Dominic caught my hand briefly, our marks flaring brighter at the contact. "No matter what's decided," he said softly, "we face it together." The certainty in his voice steadied something within me that had been trembling since Elena's revelations. Whatever came next, I was no longer alone. Dawn found me sleepless in my quarters, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind. The breach of the archives, Elena's proposal, the Keeper's confirmation of our bond's significance. It was too much to absorb. For years I'd been invisible within the pack, a rejected Omega relegated to the margins. Now, suddenly, I was central to pack security, to ancient magic, to political alliances that could reshape territories. A soft knock at my door interrupted these thoughts. I opened it to find Mara, her expression grave. "The Alpha requests your presence in the Great Hall," she said, immediately. "Something's happened." Heart pounding, I followed her through the corridors of the pack house, which bustled with unusual activity for such an early hour. Guards patrolled in pairs, their expressions tense. Pack members whispered in clusters, falling silent as we passed. The Great Hall had been transformed overnight into a command center of sorts. Maps covered tables, pack members reported in from patrols, and at the center of it, all stood Thaddeus, issuing orders with the calm efficiency of a born leader. Dominic was beside him, looking stronger than he had since the poisoning, engaged in intense discussion with several senior warriors. When he saw me enter, he broke away immediately, crossing the hall to my side. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "You're all right?" "I'm fine," I assured him, confused by his concern. "What's happened?" His expression darkened. The Blackwater delegation departed before dawn, without notice or formal farewell. Elena left? I couldn't hide my surprise. Diplomatic protocol demanded formal leave-taking after such a visit, especially given the proposed alliance. "Not just left," Thaddeus added, joining us. "Fled would be more accurate. And they took something with them, the oldest volume of our pack records, specifically the section detailing the ancient accord." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "She never intended to help us," I said quietly. "She wanted information about healer bloodlines and life bonds for the Blackwater pack. Or for whoever she truly serves," Dominic added grimly. "The guards reported strange markings on her arm when she shifted form to flee, markings associated with the Shadow Crescent. The revelation sent ice through my veins. Elena had been Shadow Crescent all along, infiltrating the Blackwater pack, just as she'd attempted to manipulate ours. The breach of the archives, the warnings about danger to our bond, all part of an elaborate deception. We're accelerating our plans," Thaddeus announced. "The Moonstone Circle is our best option now. You'll depart at midday with our strongest warriors as escort." "Both of us?" I asked, uncertain. "Both of you," he confirmed. "The bond must be completed and secured before the Shadow Crescent can act on whatever knowledge they've gained." His expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the father beneath the alpha. "And it seems the moon has chosen your path regardless of our plans. Who am I to stand against such ancient magic?" The preparations moved with military precision after that. By midday, a small contingent was ready to depart. Dominic and I, 6 of the pack's most trusted warriors, and Morgana, who insisted on accompanying us despite her advanced age. "The rituals must be performed correctly," she stated firmly, when Thaddeus expressed concern for her safety. "And I'm the only one living who remembers them properly." As we prepared to leave through the pack house's rear entrance, Gabriel appeared, his expression unreadable. "Alpha," he addressed Thaddeus, "I should accompany them as your beta. My place is protecting the heir." Suspicion flickered through me. Gabriel had opposed everything about our bond from the beginning. Why would he suddenly volunteer to protect it? My bracelet warmed slightly in warning. Thaddeus seemed to share my reservations. "Your place is here, Gabriel, securing the pack house in my absence. I will lead the escort myself." Surprise registered on Gabriel's face, quickly masked by respectful acquiescence. But as we departed, I caught him watching us, his eyes cold with an emotion I couldn't name, disappointment, or perhaps thwarted purpose. The journey to the Moonstone Circle took us through dense forest, following ancient paths visible only to Morgana's experienced eyes. By sunset, we reached a clearing where massive stones stood in a perfect circle, their surfaces etched with symbols similar to those on my bracelet. In the center stood a single, larger stone that gleamed with an inner light that intensified as the full moon rose. "The sacred space has recognized your presence," Morgana observed, satisfaction in her voice. "The old magic stirs." As darkness fell completely, she directed the warriors to form a protective perimeter around the circle. Thaddeus took position at the eastern stone, representing leadership and new beginnings. Dominic and I stood before the central moonstone, our marked wrists exposed to its soft glow. "The ritual is simple but demands absolute conviction," Morgana explained. "The life bond can only form when both parties choose it freely, with full understanding of its meaning." "Which is?" Dominic asked, his eyes never leaving mine. "Two becoming one, while remaining two," she replied. "Your strengths become shared, your weaknesses balanced by each other. Neither dominates, both serve the greater whole." She looked between us solemnly. "Once formed, it cannot be broken except by death. And even then, part of each lives on in the other. The weight of this commitment hung in the air between us. In the space of weeks, we had moved from formal distance to this moment of profound choice. I searched Dominic's face in the moonlight, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. What I found instead was certainty, and something deeper. A warmth that had been growing between us through every conversation, every healing session, every moment of shared understanding. "I choose this," he said quietly, speaking to me rather than the assembled witnesses. "I choose you, not for politics or pack advantage, but for the person I've come to know, the person who saw me at my weakest and lent me her strength without question." My heart swelled with emotions I'd never dared to acknowledge. "I choose you," I responded, my voice steady despite the tears threatening. Not as heir or future alpha, but as the man who looked at a rejected Omega and saw value, who listened when others had dismissed me for years. Morgana nodded, satisfied. "Place your marked wrists together upon the moonstone." We did as instructed, our glowing marks touching against the cool surface of the ancient stone. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Light blazed from the connection point, engulfing our joined hands and spreading up our arms. The moonstone itself began to pulse in rhythm with our heartbeats, which I realized with wonder had synchronized perfectly. Morgana began to chant in an ancient language I didn't recognize but somehow understood, words of binding, of balance, of strength shared rather than imposed. The other stones in the circle began to glow in response, creating a perfect ring of light around us. Through it all, I remained connected to Dominic, our eyes locked as the bond between us solidified into something unbreakable. I could feel him now, not just his physical presence or surface emotions, but the essence of who he was, his courage, his compassion beneath the necessary armor of leadership, his hopes for the pack's future. And he was seeing me in the same way. My resilience through rejection, my connection to the old magic, my capacity for healing that extended beyond the physical. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the light between us intensified to near blinding brightness. For a moment that seemed both instantaneous and eternal, we existed as a single consciousness. Our separate selves merged completely while remaining distinct. Then the light receded, flowing back into our marks, which now bore identical patterns. The symbols from my bracelet etched into both our skin in silvery light. "It is done," Morgana announced, satisfaction and awe mingling in her voice. "The bond is complete." The warriors around the perimeter shifted restlessly, clearly affected by the power they had witnessed. Thaddeus stepped forward, his expression a complex mixture of emotions: concern for his son, wonder at the ancient magic, and a new respect as he looked at me. "You are now formally joined," he said, his voice carrying the weight of alpha authority. "What the moon has blessed, let no wolf challenge." The formal acknowledgement settled over me like a mantle of belonging I had never expected to wear. No longer rejected, no longer marginal. I was bound to the future alpha in the most ancient and respected way possible. Dominic's hand remained clasped with mine, our newly marked wrists pressed together. Through our strengthened bond, I could feel his joy, his relief, and his unwavering certainty that we had chosen correctly. "The pack will need to adjust to this new reality," he murmured for my ears alone, "but they will. What we bring together, strength and healing, leadership and compassion, is what our people have always needed, even when they forgot to value it." As we turned to begin the journey back to pack territory, secure in our completed bond, I caught Morgana watching us with an expression of profound satisfaction. "You knew," I said quietly when we had a moment alone. "You knew what would happen when a healer and an heir formed a life bond." The ancient keeper smiled, the moonlight silvering her white hair. "I hoped," she corrected. "The old texts speak of such unions bringing not just security to the packs involved, but a renewal, a return to balance between strength and healing, between power and wisdom." She patted my hand gently. "Your children will carry both gifts, you know. They will lead differently than those who came before." The mention of children, our children, sent a wave of warmth through me that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the future suddenly opening before us. A future where I wasn't just tolerated or even valued for a singular ability, but truly belonged, truly mattered to the pack's continuation. As we walked beneath the star-scattered sky, Dominic's hand firmly in mine, and our bond humming contentedly between us, I thought of my grandmother and her cryptic words, "When the time comes, you'll be more than they ever allowed you to be." She had been right. The rejected Omega had found her place, not through submission or dominance, but through the ancient, balanced strength of a bond that honored both our natures equally. And in that balance lay not just our future, but the future of the pack itself.